Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a really fascinating deep dive today into something that, well, it touches so many lives, often in ways we don't even realize, trauma.
Hmm.
And we're pulling insights primarily from Bessel van der Kolk's um, really seminal work, The Body Keeps the Score.
A hugely influential book. Van der Kolk, he spent decades really immersed in understanding trauma.
Yeah, he's a psychiatrist, researcher, founded the Trauma Research Foundation. His perspective isn't just academic, it's built on, years working directly with survivors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Looking at the science, but also listening deeply to people's experiences.
So our mission in this dive is to get past just the label trauma. We want to understand what's actually happening inside the brain and body when it occurs.
Why it feels so inescapable
Mhm.
sometimes.
Right. And then crucially, explore some really powerful pathways towards healing, ones that actually acknowledge this deep physical impact.
It's so important because, as Van der Kolk describes it, for, well, over 30 years, his clients kept saying the same thing.
What was that?
Whether they were veterans or abuse survivors, they'd say their bodies remembered things their minds were trying desperately to forget or push away.
Ah,
So the conventional idea that trauma is just something in the past, something you can, get
yeah.
over mentally, it just didn't match their reality.
Right. And that phrase, the body keeps the score, it just perfectly captures that core idea, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because let's be honest, the words trauma and traumatic get thrown around so much now, even within psychology.
They do. They can almost lose their specific meaning sometimes.
Yeah.
And defining it clearly is tricky too. You don't actually have to be the direct victim of an event to be traumatized by it.
Right. Witnessing something or being indirectly involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That can definitely lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
Hmm.
Although, it's also important to note, as the source does, not everyone who goes through something traumatic develops PTSD.
Okay. And the formal understanding of PTSD, that really gained traction after Vietnam, didn't it?
It did. Clinicians started seeing these undeniable patterns in veteran struggles. That pressure eventually led to it being included in the DSM.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the standard clinicians use.
Exactly. And the DSM definition, it lists the key symptoms pretty well. Reliving the experience.
Which isn't just thoughts, right? It can be physical.
Oh, absolutely. Unpleasant physical sensations, intrusive thoughts, negative moods, feeling detached, numb, avoiding anything that reminds you of it. It's described as this complex response to real or threatened injury or assault.
Okay, so the DSM describes what it looks like, the symptoms. But where does van der Kolk argue that definition falls a bit short?
Well, the book suggests that while the DSM is useful for listing symptoms, it doesn't fully capture the root causes,
Meaning?
meaning how the trauma gets sort of burned into us physically, that deep embodied feeling. It focuses on the symptoms, but maybe doesn't fully grasp that it's not just a disorder in the mind, it's a fundamental shift in how the body and brain operate in the world.
Can you give us an example from the book, something that shows that disconnect between just symptoms and that deeper reality?
Yeah, the story of Tom, a veteran mentioned in the source, really illustrates this. He was, I think, 10 years out from Vietnam,
Okay.
and his experiences were still completely dominating his life. He wouldn't take sleep meds, and when his therapist pushed him, he finally admitted something profound.
What was it?
He felt he needed to hold on to the trauma, that it was like a living memorial to his friends who died.
Wow.
So for him, healing felt like abandoning them. He was stuck in this awful cycle, recklessness, drinking, isolating himself.
Acting out the trauma.
Essentially, yeah, living out those intense combat emotions and physical tensions again and again.
Yeah.
He couldn't escape it because, on some level, he felt he shouldn't. His behavior, the symptoms, they stemmed from this deep, embodied need to stay connected to the trauma itself.
That's powerful. So it's not just a bad memory he can't shake. His whole being is locked in that experience.
Precisely. And that lack of understanding, historically, about how deeply trauma imprints, well, it made effective treatment incredibly difficult.
Which brings us right to the next critical point. What is trauma actually doing to our brains and bodies? How does it cause this lock-in?
Right. If we look at the neuroscience Van der Kolk presents, the brain doesn't just, bounce back after a major trauma.
It doesn't reset.
No. It fundamentally changes how you connect, both with yourself and with other people.
Huh.
Brain imaging literally shows this happening. Trauma can overwhelm the very systems designed to keep you safe.
Overwhelms them how? What's going on inside?
Think of sensory overload, but like dialed up to 11.
Okay.
Intrusive sights, sounds, smells, physical feelings from the event become these incredibly potent triggers in the present day. Your brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, your internal alarm bell, starts ringing constantly.
Even when there's no danger.
Even when there's no objective danger. It floods your body with stress hormones, neurochemicals, locking you into these intense states: terror, helplessness, rage, or sometimes just complete shutdown, immobilization.
And I recall the source mentioning specific brain changes.
Yes, exactly. Key areas get hit hard. During the traumatic event itself, the parts of your brain responsible for language and logic, Broca's area, for example, the part that helps you sequence events and talk about them, they can essentially go offline.
Shut down.
Yeah. So you can't form a coherent narrative. You often can't even verbalize what's happening while it's happening.
So instead of being processed like a story beginning, middle, end, those raw sensory inputs, the fear, the sounds, they just get stored differently, like trapped.
That's a perfect way to put it, trapped in the body. And the memory itself is fundamentally different. It's not a clear story you recall.
How is it experienced then?
Traumatic memories are often fragmented. They come back as flashbacks, intense sensory fragments, emotions that feel like the event is happening right now, not like a memory of the past, but are reliving in the present.
That sounds terrifying and exhausting.
It is. This fragmentation, this lack of processing, keeps that threat system on constant high alert. It makes feeling safe, trusting others, trusting yourself, feel almost impossible.
Like you can never fully let your guard down.
Never. And because living like that is so unbearable, people naturally try to cope, often by trying to numb the pain.
Alcohol, drugs.
Right. Addictions, risky behaviors. But the book is really clear. These are attempts to manage the unbearable symptoms, but they don't resolve the core issue.
They don't get at the trapped stuff.
Exactly. They don't unlock those trapped emotional and physical experiences. And meanwhile, your body is still pumping out stress hormones like cortisol day after day, which has devastating long-term consequences for physical health. We're talking immune problems, cardiovascular issues.
So that impact cascades. It's not just psychological distress, it's physical health, it's daily functioning.
It completely disrupts daily life. You can fall into these awful cycles: panic attacks, chronic fear, overwhelming helplessness. Intense physical reactions become common: racing heart, dizziness, feeling frozen.
And relationships must suffer hugely.
Immensely. Because if you're profoundly disconnected from your own body, your own feelings, how can you possibly connect meaningfully with someone else? It becomes incredibly difficult.
Now, if trauma has this kind of devastating impact on adults, the source really emphasizes that children are in a unique position,
Right.
more vulnerable.
Yes, significantly more vulnerable to the lasting effects. It's a critical point Van der Kolk makes.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. Children are still developing their sense of self. They haven't fully learned how to regulate their emotions or navigate relationships. Their healthy development hinges massively on their caregivers meeting their needs reliably, especially in those very early years.
This is where attachment theory comes in, secure versus disorganized.
Exactly. Secure attachment forms when a child generally feels safe, seen, and soothed by their caregiver. It builds a secure base. But disorganized attachment, that often stems from situations of neglect or abuse.
And that creates a specific kind of problem.
A terrible paradox. The child's source of safety, their parent, is also their source of terror. Imagine that conflict. You're biologically driven to seek comfort from someone who simultaneously frightens or harms you.
That sounds impossible.
It puts the child in a constant, unbearable state of threat. They're dependent and distrustful, needing closeness, but fearing it.
How does that manifest? What does that chronic threat do to a child long term?
It leads to chronic extreme anxiety. And often, as a way to survive that internal overwhelm, children learn to disconnect. They numb out, they disconnect from their bodies, shut down emotionally.
So they might look okay on the outside.
They might appear eerily calm, compliant, maybe zoned out, but inside they are completely overwhelmed, just trying to manage the internal chaos. And the source points to that landmark ACE study.
The Adverse Childhood Experiences study from the 90s.
Right. Showing a really strong correlation between childhood trauma and adversity and a whole host of serious mental, emotional, and physical health problems decades later in adulthood. The impact is profound and long-lasting.
Okay, so we have this picture now. Trauma isn't just an event. It's an embodied experience that rewires the brain and nervous system, especially when it happens early, which leads to the absolutely crucial question: what helps? How do you heal something held so deeply in the body?
Well, the first thing Van der Kolk stresses is that treating trauma is complex. There's no single preferred treatment, no magic bullet therapy that works for everyone or fixes everything.
So it's not just about finding the right kind of therapy.
Not usually, no. It often requires a combination of approaches, things that address the physical side, the psychological side, and sometimes the social context too.
And the key emphasis from the book seems to be.
You have to include therapies that work directly with the body. That's non-negotiable in this framework. The body itself has learned a maladaptive response, and it needs to learn how to feel safe again, how to manage those triggers without becoming overwhelmed.
So the goal isn't just talking about the trauma, but helping the body literally change its response.
Exactly. It's about reconnecting the thinking brain, the rational mind, with the feeling brain and the physical sensations happening in the body. Learning to notice, okay, my chest is tight, my heart is racing.
Instead of just being swept away by it.
Right. Learning to notice it, tolerate it, and then respond calmly to it. That's the foundation for rebuilding a sense of internal safety. It's about getting to those deeper embodied experiences, as the book calls them, that lie beneath the surface story, the narrative of what happened.
Okay, so if the body is key, how do traditional approaches like talk therapy or medication stack up in this view? Where do they fit or fall short?
Talk therapy definitely has its place. Van der Kolk acknowledges that, especially for bringing unspoken secrets into the light, for creating a coherent narrative where possible. But if the core of the trauma is held non-verbally, as those fragmented sensations and emotions we talked about, simply talking about the event might not reach or resolve that deep physiological imprint.
It doesn't unlock the body's memory.
It often doesn't, not fully.
Yeah.
And medication. Well, it can certainly be helpful for managing distressing symptoms, intense anxiety, depression, insomnia. It can provide relief.
But it's not a cure.
The source suggests it often just papers over the root causes. It dampens the symptoms, but doesn't necessarily help the body and brain re-regulate the underlying stress response system. It doesn't resolve the trapped experience or teach the body it's safe now.
So the real focus needs to be on integrating mind and body, finding ways to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. And ideally, doing that in a way that also incorporates social connection and support, because trauma is so isolating.
Right. Therapies that connect body and brain, often within a supportive group context, seem essential for truly releasing trauma's grip.
That's the core message for healing, yes.
And the book explores several specific techniques, some less traditional, that show a lot of promise here. Can you walk us through some of those?
Sure. One that gets a lot of attention is EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
Right, that involves following the therapist's finger movements.
Yes. The patient tracks the movements visually while recalling aspects of the trauma. The theory is that this bilateral stimulation helps the brain process the traumatic memory differently, perhaps in a more nonverbal way. The exact how is still debated, but many find it effective.
Okay, interesting. What else?
There's sensorimotor psychotherapy. This approach explicitly focuses on tracking the connections between physical sensations in the body and the client's thoughts and emotions in the present moment.
So making those links conscious.
Exactly. Helping the client notice, understand, and then manage the trauma triggers as they actually manifest physically.
And neurofeedback, that sounds quite high-tech.
It is a bit. It uses EEG machines to monitor your brainwaves in real time. You might see your brain activity visualized on a screen.
How does that help?
The idea is that by seeing your own brain patterns, you can learn to recognize and gradually gain some conscious control over your physiological responses.
Yeah.
A specific type, heart rate variability, HRV, biofeedback, focuses on learning to regulate your heart rate, which is a very direct way to calm the nervous system down.
Fascinating. What about things that maybe feel less like therapy and more like activities?
No, Van der Kolk is a huge advocate for those,
Yeah.
especially activities involving movement and interaction, often in groups.
Like what?
Well, mindfulness practice has strong research backing now. It demonstrably improves emotional regulation, helps calm that hyperreactive emotional brain, and can even benefit the immune system.
And physical movement itself.
Crucial. Yoga is highlighted specifically because it's designed to increase body awareness, to help you tune into physical sensations and link them with your emotional state. It fosters that mind-body connection.
Makes sense.
Then you have things like music, dancing, drumming, even certain types of art. These can be incredibly powerful, especially in groups,
Why groups?
because they combine that social support, feeling connected to others, with physical, often rhythmic ways to get back in sync with your own body and, importantly, with other people.
Yeah.
Synchrony is key.
So shared rhythm helps regulate.
It seems to. Theater is another one mentioned. Great for creative self-expression and exploring different roles or narratives.
Anything simpler people can do.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Journaling can be very helpful for processing experiences and starting to rewrite your personal story, giving you a sense of agency. And the book even mentions the potential benefits of certain kinds of deep, safe touch, like therapeutic massage, for releasing some of that stored physical tension and the emotions locked within it.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the really powerful core message from van der Kolk's work from The Body Keeps the Score is just that. The body does keep the score. Trauma isn't just a mental event. It gets physically encoded, it lives in the body, and that can cause serious long-term physical and mental health issues, keeping people trapped in those terrifying, fragmented re-experiences.
And it's vital to understand this isn't some rare condition affecting only a few. The source presents trauma as a major public health crisis.
The statistics are sobering.
They really are. Hundreds of thousands of child abuse cases reported annually just in the U.S. 1 in 4 U.S. women reporting intimate partner violence. Tens, even hundreds of thousands of veterans from recent conflicts diagnosed with PTSD. It's widespread.
It really is pervasive. But the hopeful part, the real contribution of van der Kolk's work, is showing that there are pathways forward.
Yes, by understanding how trauma lodges itself in the body and mind together, and by using approaches that specifically work with that connection,
People can heal.
people can move through it, they can resolve the trauma's hold, learn to feel safe in their own skin again, and, as he puts it, reclaim the fullness of their lives.
So, a final thought then for you listening. Given everything we've discussed and considering how often our culture tends to separate the mind from the body, what does it truly mean to recognize trauma as this profoundly embodied experience? How might really grasping that change not just our approach to individual healing, but maybe how we think about health, connection, and community overall? Something to mull over.